お待たせいたしました。パネルディスカッション。
We would like to now resume the panel discussion. Let's ask the panelists to come up to the stage. Please welcome the panelists with a round of applause. I'm now giving the microphone to Mr. Takada, who will be moderating the panel discussion. Thank you very much. Let's begin the panel discussion. The theme of this session is GX strategies for positioning Japan as an investment destination. In order for Japan to become an international financial hub, we have to become a destination for financial services and investment. And what can we boast as a growth industry, growth sector? GX is being flagged by the private sector and the public sector, which is attracting attention from investors around the world. So we have participants from here and from abroad to speak about the expectations and hopes towards GX, the actual investments that they are engaged in, and what we need to do more in order to invite more GX-related investment. We have three highly qualified panelists, and Mr. Hattori Keiji of Brookfield, Japan, Representative Director, Mr. Arita Hiroyuki, President and CEO, BlackRock Japan, and Ms. Harada Fumiyo, Managing Executive Officer, Development Bank of Japan. Thank you for being here. I would like to talk about the GX strategy of Japan and the GX Acceleration Agency to which I belong as a stage setter. Since we have non-Japanese participants, I prepared the slides in English for the convenience of the audience, and I should have introduced myself. My name is Takada of the GX Acceleration Agency. You may not have heard the name of our organization. It was only started up last year in July, so we are a very young organization, and I'm a director there. First of all, what is the GX policy in Japan? GX stands for Green Transformation, and most likely this is a word that has been created by the Japanese government, and it's not a proper English word that's generally used in English-speaking countries, but we truly hope that this will take its place in the English dictionary in the future. So what is the aim of green transformation? By 2050, we want to achieve carbon neutrality and strengthen industrial competitiveness and economic growth. So the key is to simultaneously achieve all these aims. They are not in trade-off relationship. All of these aims ought to be achieved in tandem. So that's the strong message of GX. And 150 trillion yen from both the public and private sector will be invested in the next 10 years. Of the 150 trillion yen, 20 trillion is from the national budget. So Japan Climate Transition Bond, GX Economic Transition Bond, which is the world's first sovereign transition bond, has been issued since last year. So 20 trillion of the 150 trillion will come from the national treasury, but the remaining 130 trillion comes from the private sector. So sustainable finance, transition finance have to be developed for that purpose in order to collect that money. So specifically, which are the sectors where investment will be conducted? This is 2 years ago in December 23, and sector-specific investment strategy was identified by the government, which defined 16 priority areas, including steel, in the materials sector, or automobiles in final products area, and clean energy and other areas are included in the 16 priority areas that will be the focus of GX investment. And currently, the GX 2040 vision, new government packages under debate. GX industrial structure, including GX market creation, is being debated, and GX industrial location is also being discussed. And realistic transition and contribution to the global decarbonization will be included in the vision. Late last year, the draft vision was made public, and currently we are in the public comment period. And from next fiscal year, emissions trading system and carbon pricing mechanisms based upon law will be introduced in Japan. So promoting private sector investment in GX and transition finance is being promoted for that purpose. Transition finance means projects that are not green yet, but there has to be change in the highly emitting sectors to become low emitting projects, and transition finance is required. So the basic principle was announced by the Japanese government in 2021, and sector roadmaps have been prepared for hard-to-abate sectors, and the public and private sector are working together in order to achieve those roadmaps. And about our GX Acceleration Agency. Last year in July, we were launched by the Japanese government as an accredited organization, and the aim is GX investment. I talked about 130 trillion yen from the private sector. So our mission is to accelerate the private sector investment. Mainly 3 things will be done as shaded in red on this page. We provide debt guarantee to private sector projects. GX investment may require innovative technology, which risk may be higher than what the private sector can afford. So by the government providing guarantee, we would like to promote these projects. And the second point is the ETS and carbon pricing to be introduced from next fiscal year, which I touched upon in the previous page, and we will be administrating these systems. And thirdly, act as the GX hub to promote research, stakeholder collaboration, policy discussions, and international communications on GX and sustainability. In other words, we are going to provide for locus in order to connect the financial sector, the private sector, and the government. That concludes the introduction of our organization and the Japanese government's policy. So let's turn to our conversation with the panelists. First, we have panelists from Japanese organizations and non-Japanese organizations. And can each of you comment on how you view the Japanese GX market from the investor's perspective, and what are you doing in terms of GX-related investments? First, from non-Japanese players, Mr. Hattori, please.
Thank you very much. As has been introduced, I'm from Brookfield. My name is Keiji Hattori. Thank you for this opportunity. First, regarding Brookfield, I'm sure a lot of you don't know who we are, so let me briefly introduce ourselves. Brookfield, in the world of alternative investment, we are the biggest player, biggest asset manager when it comes to alternative assets. So real assets, energy, infrastructure, renewables, transition, and real estate. So these are the areas in which we have major businesses. We are an asset manager in these areas. 10 years ago, I encountered Brookfield, and I set up a Japanese entity. Nearly no one knew about us at the time. There were no investors, but gradually, vis-a-vis Japanese institutional investors, well, investment is done through funds. So alternative institutional investors I made rounds among them to explain what we're doing, to enlist their support. As a result, in 10 years, more than 130 Japanese institutional investors have decided to invest more than 1 trillion in our assets. So the risk money that flows into alternative assets that happens in large ways. Large flows are created based on my experience. In the United States, for example, as you well know, under COVID, interest rates went up and fixed income prices went down. As a result, credit crunching started to happen, especially in the U.S. financial institutions. And like mushrooms, credit funds sprang up, and they met the funding needs of corporations. And institutional investors around the world made investments into private credits and direct lending. So money flowed into such funds. There were only 400 credit funds in 2019. 3 years later, 2,500 funds or firms in 2021. So it grew rapidly. And the money that was mobilized amounts to 200 trillion yen. So they were all after this thin spread. Investors mobilized their funds going after this thin spread. There was this huge need, and that is why a great flow of money was created. The same happened to real estate in the United States. Well, lots of alternative funds do invest in real estate properties, but there were maturities. And when they happened during COVID, prices were down. They were not able to sell the properties or funds. And there are investors who wanted to sell, as well as those who didn't. And so the secondary market was created. Various funds were set up for that, and money flowed into that, and funds helped funds. So based on a return, investments were made. Talking about Brookfield, we are the largest transition fund. It's 4 trillion yen worth. Many Japanese institutional investors invest. More than 1,000 trillion is poured into that. And the narrative is not at all about saving the earth, saving the world or the people. It's about return. Brookfield has a track record in renewables, and investors who expected the same to happen with renewables started to invest. So we're in the year of the snake, according to Chinese zodiac. So risk money sort of wanders around the world, trails, and they would stop at a point of return to eat, feed, and that has come to Japan. And so this snake needs to feed itself within Japan. Otherwise, it will go away somewhere else. And in the Asset Management Leading Nation initiative, and I think this is what we're going to discuss later. So the question is, how can we continue to achieve sustainable growth in this world? That is the question.
Thank you, Hattori-san. Global money, a big serpentine, is pursuing return in Japan and targeting Japan. Thank you very much. Another non-Japanese player, Arita-san, please. Thank you. My name is Arita of BlackRock. Thank you for having me. I will talk about BlackRock's activity in the past few years and examples of transition finance in other markets around the world. And then I will also comment on what we're doing in the GX market in Japan. Transition to low-carbon economy would require huge structural reform. And we believe that this will generate historical investment opportunities. We identify 5 mega forces, for example, AI, geopolitical issues, one of which is this, and we are focusing on this area. And this trend has been impacted by various political factors, and there will be ups and downs, but it's a irreversible trend. As mentioned by Takada-san, 150 trillion yen shall be needed in Japan, but huge amount of investment and loans would be required, and it is public-private partnership or blended finance that will play a major role in this context. In the case of energy transition, these are super long projects, unprecedentedly long, so sufficient economic viability has to be confirmed and explained to the investors in order to solicit their investments. So there could be risk that the private sector cannot afford to bear, and that could be compensated by the public sector. Thus, a blended finance that would encourage the inflow of private sector funds is indispensable. At BlackRock, since a few years ago, we have engaged in such projects around the world, and let me introduce 3 or 4 such examples. First, in 2020, 4 or 5 years ago, as a fund to encourage energy transition in emerging markets, we established the Climate Finance Partnership (CFP) Blended Finance Infrastructure Fund. Japanese government through JBIC made an investment into this fund, and this encouraged the mobilization of private sector capital, and as a result, private sector Japanese financial institutions also took investments. Second example, 2 years ago at COP28, the UAE government announced the Altera project, and we decided to participate. The objective is 250 billion yen by 2030. This is a climate change fund, and we have been mandated management of part of that fund. And thirdly, partnership with IDF, which was announced in April last year. IDF stands for Insurance Development Forum. The so-called protection gap, in other words, economic loss caused by disaster versus insurance compensation. Narrowing the gap is the mission, and resilience or adaptability to extreme weather conditions in the emerging markets need to be elevated, and the objective is infrastructural debt investment. And BlackRock has been mandated as the manager. And the last project I will introduce is FastB, blended finance initiative to promote decarbonization in Southeast Asia. And at COP29 last year in November, with BlackRock and Singapore Monetary Authority taking the lead, this project was announced. From Japan, Megabank and Nexi has stated their will for mutual cooperation, and we are seeing more large Japanese financial institutions showing interest. So, tapping on the experience of governments around the world and experiences in public-private partnership, the next area we want to contribute is the 150 trillion yen GX investment and loans in Japan. In February 2023, the cabinet decision was adopted for the basic policy on GX. And since then, we have been discussing with the government, financial institutions, and operating companies to consider various investment opportunities. By the way, in October 2 years ago, then Prime Minister Kishida and government officials and we co-hosted the Japan Head of State Summit. We invited the top representatives of large financial institutions around the world to communicate to them the attraction of the Japanese financial market. As mentioned by Mr. Takada, GX will require 150 trillion yen. By the way, GX is already a normal word that everybody is using. So this is equivalent to 1 trillion US dollars. And how do we take a stake? This is a big debate. I'm sure this will be touched upon later, but hydrogen value chain, perovskite solar cell, or direct current submarine transmission cables, these are some of the projects that had attracted the attention of global investors. Thank you. BlackRock. Is BlackRock? You are engaged in very gigantic projects. Yes, 2 years ago, I cooperated with BlackRock when I was with JFSA in hosting that event. So, Arita-san, I have a specific question I wish to ask you. Recently, the second Trump administration gave birth in the United States, and Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance was established a few years ago, and financial institutes signed up. BlackRock announced that you are withdrawing. So there are some actors that have concerns over such trends. Even if you withdraw, BlackRock will continue to invest in these areas. Is that the right interpretation? Thank you. On the 9th of this month, we announced the withdrawal, and that's one frequently asked question. What we want you to understand is that we have 1,700 trillion yen of assets under investment. And all the investments we do are under the guidelines of our clients. They are all within the intention of our clients. So it's not that we use our own balance sheet to make these investments. So when we hear the voices of the clients, Net Zero initiative is already irreversible. No matter who takes the government, even if there is turnover of government, it will remain unchanged. So our portfolio management will continue to be unchanged, and we will continue to place weight on climate change related initiatives. That remains unchanged. Thank you very much. That's encouraging to hear. So we can now rest assured. So, from Japan, Harada-san, would you like to introduce what GX activities you're engaged in?
Thank you. I would like to show some slides. Can I have the clicker, please? Thank you very much. I have prepared slides in Japanese, but most of them are pictures, so please have a look. My name is Harada from the BJ, Development Bank of Japan. It's a 100% government-owned bank. Economic value and social value are both to be achieved. That's the tenet of our activities. Sustainability, being green, and economic growth to happen together. I think we respond well to such a theme. So that is one of the missions that we undertake. So we heard from two speakers about the framework and so forth, but in order to encourage you to understand the image of GX, let me share with you some specific examples of projects. It was rather recent when we came up with this definition of GX, and I think investment will continue more in earnest. And the examples that we have addressed were not necessarily called GX projects, but its fundamental nature as well as the way in which funding was done, I think is based on this GX concept. On the left-hand side, this is a hydrogen station network. In 2018, to create a network of hydrogen stations in Japan, this company was set up by 11 companies here in Japan. And DBJ has been part of this since the beginning for funding. And hydrogen stations for fuel cells, no need for hydrogen without a car, but unless there is a hydrogen station, you will not be able to sell a fuel cell car. So egg or chicken. And unless the car is purchased and hydrogen is purchased, you can't have a business. And of course, subsidies played a major role here. And those who benefited most from these stations were automakers. And so from the very beginning, we invited car makers to make investments. In 2023, well, originally, these were stations meant for passenger cars, but starting from 23, we started to offer these stations for commercial cars, commercial vehicles as well. We have entered the second stage. On the right-hand side, Tsubame BHB, on-site, small-sized, low temperature, low pressure ammonia manufacturing equipment. It produces green ammonia, so local production, local consumption type of ammonia. In 2022, various corporations and financial institutions, together with them, we made an investment. And it's only recent when actual equipment was made. So it started from an idea. It's a venture investment project. Rather than having a venture capital team within us, Society 5.0 team was set up specifically for this. When can this be manufactured? When will it be commercialized and become a viable business? We weren't sure at the beginning, and that is why we came up with this dedicated team for this. Next is about green steel, using hydrogen instead of coal to reduce iron ore. This is a Swedish company that's involved. Hi24, a European fund. We are making co-investment together with a fund in Europe. And as a limited partner, DBJ is investing in this fund as a condition for investment. When there's a new project, we're going to make a co-investment. So that scheme was utilized. Overseas, when we go to a new country, when we enter a new area, we take such a scheme. When we want to invest in a specific project, oftentimes we use this scheme. So on our own, taking risks to find a new area to make one's own investment, I think it's much better to take this scheme. It's more efficient. And the point here is green steel. It's very new, hydrogen-reduced iron. And already 60% of the investors from the start of the construction, they agreed to offtake agreements. That was a major point. And green steel we're talking about. So compared to ordinary steel made in a furnace, a blast furnace, customers said that they're willing to pay a 12% premium if it's green. And lastly, as a more recent example, perovskite solar cell manufacturing equipment that we're investing in, as was mentioned earlier. I think you know about perovskite. Compared to silicon, it's lighter and it has more flexibility. It bends well. And where traditional panels were not installed, these panels can be installed. And iodine, which is one of the major materials, is produced in abundance in Japan. So as Japan-made energy, it's very important. And this is a clear GX project now because it's more recent, but Sekisui Chemical is making an investment, and they're manufacturing solar film. They're about to have mass production. And there was news saying that they're going to purchase a Sakai plant from Sharp, and we made an investment. So I just wanted to share some of these examples. Thank you very much.
はい、原田さん、ありがとう。
Thank you, Ms. Harada. We heard from the three panelists, and they all agree that there's high potential in Japanese GX projects. In fact, how can we further expand the market in order to invite more investment in GX in Japan? What needs to be done? Then could we start from you again, Hattori-san?
Thank you very much. So various domestic examples, projects we have heard about. It takes a lot of initial investment, amount of money is large. So an institution like DBJ needs to monitor these projects for kicking off these projects. That's critical. But if we are to mass produce the equipment or for Japanese technology to be developed utilizing global funds, then we need a variety of different schemes and mechanisms. So earning a return on a fund, that is a well understood discussion. I'm sure you understand. But Japanese institutional investors, to explain our fund to them, to encourage them to invest in us, that's what I've been doing. But it requires a lot of communication. And GPIF, for example, in terms of real estate infrastructure, transition. This is already published, so I think I can share this with you. But GPIF is already investing in a multitude of funds in those areas. It's not because of our brand name. I have convinced them of the alpha that we generate. They go through our numbers and track records and explanation very meticulously. They have this internal mechanism that allows them to do so. And we have to make adjustments so that we fit their purpose. It takes more than a year after hundreds of discussions, and then they decide on one investment. So this is about between parties. If it's overseas, it might be easier, but we are talking about overseas institutional investors to let them understand the attraction of Japanese investments, and it's not easy because it requires sophisticated understanding. And JFSA is implementing a variety of initiatives, enhancing asset management capabilities of asset managers here. That is one of the things they're focusing on, but enhancing is not about increasing the number of investment trusts. It's not about creating more strategies. Well, I talked about GPIF. They have a direct investment team. So in terms of asset management, they verify and analyze all the numbers and everything. We call them asset management summarize. Each one of them is wonderful. And if such asset managers can be found in many asset management firms, and if they can eloquently tell the attraction of Japanese investment to overseas institutional investors, I think we would need 10 times or 100 times more such asset managers here in Japan if we are to do that. So there are initiatives to raise financial literacy. That is the right direction, of course. But Japanese technology, the attraction, the benefit of Japan, we have very patient capital, such culture. In order to invite risk money from around the world, in order to let the flow come to Japan, I think we need to raise financial literacy across the board. At a graduate school called Globus, I've been teaching the basics of business for over 20 years. Every year, very intently interested, very intellectual people come to listen to my lectures every year. And they are the engine of Japan's strength. So I think we need to incorporate such a concept and thinking into financial literacy education.
Thank you, Hattori-san. You touched the very important point. We need to enhance asset management capability, and that's the policy being pursued by the national government. And until last summer, I was in charge of that project at the JFSA. And one foundation that's critical is human resources. And that's the point you emphasized. So, in a wide manner, we have to improve financial literacy. And of course, that applies to expert investors. But we also need to enhance the scope of candidates who will eventually be working for asset managers. So your comments are very well aligned with the national government's policy. Next, Arita-san. So how can we invite more investment from overseas to Japanese green transformation? That was your question. This is a very simple subject. Money doesn't flow in just because it's Japan or just because the project is about GX. That's not how money flows. That's not how money behaves. If there is return in proportion to risk, money may come, and that's the important thing. For example, renewable energy facility. Say there are 2 facilities and 7% yield is generated in Denmark, but 2% in Japan. Then Japan facility will not receive attention from the global market. So a capital structure must be built, robust. Equity investors and debt investors have to be persuaded that they would be enjoying sufficient yield. So when you think about all of those factors, for example, in utility power sector, review of the electricity tariff or government subsidies, those are some factors eventually that will have to be factored in. Decarbonization in Japan. GX will not only contribute to decarbonization, but economic growth of Japan, as well as energy security of Japan. So if the first deal was done at low interest rate with domestic investors, then why don't you just do that by yourselves without inviting global investors? That's the kind of message we will be receiving. So even when investment may be increasing in Japan, I think you have to come up with the general optimization of the universe at large and offer appropriate return against the appropriate risk to the investors. Thank you very much. Investment is not charity, so just because GX is positive to the global environment, that would not be enough to invite investment. Return has to be generated, and especially if we want global funds to come in, we have to provide return that would persuade global investors. So structuring has to be done in a way that would allow the structure to generate such return. You talked about electricity tariff, but when we see Japanese energy-related projects, the cost cannot be trickled down to the final consumers, or the percentage that's trickled down to the price paid by the final consumer is very limited. So it's difficult for global investors to invest in such projects, so we hear. So we hope that some improvement can be achieved in that area too. Harada-san.
As Arita-san just said, initially, if we come up with a structure that does not pass outside of Japan, then people will start to say, do it only in Japan. When that happens, we will have problems with volumes. Well, it takes hundreds of billions of yen in terms of GX from the supply chain point of view. We can't just contain everything within Japan. A lot of cost is not yen denominated. So in terms of having a natural hedge for foreign currency, I think we need investment from outside of Japan. We need to invite that, attract that. And as an investor, what we think is difficult when it comes to these projects is sourcing materials, transporting them, constructing facilities, and attracting customers. You have to go through every step of the way, and one single missing step is going to lead to failure. And so supply chain is critical. So public as well as private sectors need to be conscious of the need for collaboration, to have close interactions with each other if we are to make such projects a success. And green steel I talked about. Well, I said that over 10% premium is paid by these customers. And steel is everywhere within our everyday life. It is at the basis of energy that we enjoy. So to what extent can we pass on the cost? That's a difficult issue. But I think we need a structural change. It's about the whole country. And customers like us, consumers, all of us need to understand the value. I think we need a system that allows the value to be translated into a higher price. We talked about electricity prices earlier, but I think as part of the overall picture, that aspect is important.
Thank you, Harada-san. You talked about passing on the cost to the price. In reality, asking the customers to be understanding may be difficult. So policy intervention and other ingenuity may be required. But by the way, what about other markets around the world? You said in the case of domestic projects, it's difficult to achieve return that is equivalent to projects around the world. So what's the difference between non-Japanese projects in this area versus Japanese projects? Hattori-san and Arita-san, to the extent you are aware of, can you comment on this issue?
Okay, I'll start. In overseas, outside of Japan, institutional investors have different buckets of funds. So for low return, they would go for low risk. So if we are after low return, then you will have to accept higher risk. So within that framework, they make investments, different buckets of funds, if you will. And in relation to that, emerging markets, transition. Well, transition is difficult enough for them. And then you're talking about it in emerging markets. And although return may be high, it may be difficult for some global investors to make a decision to invest in emerging markets transition. In partnership with Altera, for example, with global institution, the return that they expect will be capped. And if there's a surplus or profit in excess of that, we would allocate that to other investors. We came up with that scheme. Risk is high, but return is high. And as a buffer, we would add a few percentage points of return, and then it becomes satisfactory for investors, and the fund flows into such a project. So here in Japan, well, return is very low here in this country. That is often pointed out. But the question perhaps is how to include a buffer in the scheme if a government institution can come up with such a scheme so that additional return can be enjoyed by overseas investors. If such a return can be generated, then it may pass. And at JBIC in around 2000, in order to increase private DBJ, in early 2000, they did some matching service, or when fund investment was required, mezzanine investment needed to be included, so they set that up. So for the growth of private market, DBJ was the first to move. They were instrumental in creating such a private market here in Japan. And being creative in such a manner is what is required today. That is particularly so for GX.
Thank you, Arita-san. As mentioned by Mr. Hattori, appropriate capital structure with public support, equity, debt, senior debt, direct finance system that can enable the establishment of an appropriate structure has to be promoted. At the risk of repeating, there are many customers around the world who have different risk-return profile. And the project has to be aligned with that different profile. And if we can offer investment opportunities that are aligned with their perspective, we would be able to mobilize their funds into Japan. But the yield against the underlying asset, if it's too low, then we can't attract money. So productivity has to be elevated in Japan in general, and I think that's one of the keys. And another point. Recently, there has been some fluctuation, but yen-denominated assets, when translated into dollar, 5% premium is offered. That's the nature of the market. So right now, there's a big opportunity. So dollar-based customers can buy yen assets and hedge against the dollar, and the yield can go up by 4 to 5%. So take this opportunity while the window is open and immediately offer opportunities while the window is open. Thank you very much. Hattori-san, you talked about investment by DBJ. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Of course. We want overseas investors to understand the attraction of Japan. We want their money, more of it. But here in Japan, we also need to foster investors who can take more risks. Creating such a structure for domestic investors here in Japan is also important. We heard some examples about that. So corporate pension funds who have long-term investment, who have a long-term view. If such long-term money can be put into GX, that would be desirable. And a government-affiliated institution like ours, we have the greatest strength in making mezzanine investment. And GX Acceleration Agency is calling for more government money. So utilizing the existing tools and within this country, creating such a structure and showcasing such a structure to overseas investors is also important, I think.
Thank you. We have very little time left for this panel, so let us conclude shortly. Various insights were obtained from the three panelists, and in order to invite investment, we need to offer return. That's only natural, and in order to secure return, diverse capital structure has to be established. And in so doing, by partnership between public sector and private sector, it's effective to offer blended finance. So DBJ is, in fact, one of the biggest players in such area. And GX Acceleration Agency, which I introduced, is an organization that offers such opportunity. So we truly hope that we can establish such innovative structures. And unless the projects themselves are profitable, return cannot be upgraded. So as mentioned by Harada-san, for hydrogen, 15% premium. If there's an off-taker that would purchase that 15% premium, that's good. If you can't sell in the market, no matter how green the project is, it's not viable as a business. There's no incentive to invest. So it's not just the supply side of the green products that are necessary, but the demand side. The buyers are important. So that's how we need to establish a GX market. Currently under debate is GX 2040 vision. And as part of the GX industrial structure, how do we establish a market that accepts GX products and services? That's another agenda item. So we need to deepen our thoughts on that. And also, what's most important is human resources. All three of you spoke about human resources, but we need to widen the scope of potential players in this market. And that's important not just for GX, but for Japan to evolve as an international financial hub. And JFLEC was established by the Japanese government last year. So we need to widen the scope and the peripheral sector for the financial sector of Japan. So we hope that that could be done through private-public partnership. This is the end of this panel, and I thank the panelists for their great contributions. Thank you.
皆様ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
speakers.